Then we'll break the trap, she said. We can't just wipe it away. We have to destroy the very surface it's clinging to. She tapped the wall lightly. The old plaster gave a dry, hollow sound. We'll scrape it off. Scrape the plaster clean until only the bare brick is left. It can't exist if it has nothing to hold on to. The plan was bold and violent, but it had a terrifying logic to it. Alex nodded, his hesitation gone. Okay, we'll need scrapers. Maybe a couple of putty knives from the school's wood shop. And then the door. Emily continued, turning the light towards the 4 rusted padlocks. We can't just lock it. The key still exists. Someone could find it. Her gaze flickered to Alex, not to accuse, but to affirm a truth they both knew. We'll destroy the key. Alex said immediately. After we lock the door one last time, we'll break it and throw the pieces away. Still not enough, Emily insisted. We have to make sure no one can ever get in here again. Even with a crowbar. We'll board it up. The idea hung in the air. It wasn't just locking a door, it was erasing its existence, turning it into an impenetrable wall. Where will we get the boards? Alex asked. The school stage, Emily answered without hesitation. There are always spare pieces of wood from old sets. We'll need a hammer and a lot of nails. They were silent for a moment, letting the plan take shape in their minds. Scrape a cursed wall clean, fasten 4 locks, destroy the key, and board up the door until it vanished. It was insane. But it was also the only thing to do. We can't do it tonight, Alex said, looking down at his bare hands. We need to be prepared. Right, Emily agreed. Tomorrow, same time. We'll meet at the wood shop, get the tools, then go to the stage, and finally come here. She looked him straight in the eye. One more night, Alex, one last time. That promise, that vow, bound them together. They were no longer 2 individuals pulled into a nightmare. They were a team. They left the room, carefully locking the door with the old iron key. Alex placed it back in the wall niche and pushed the loose brick back into place as they walked through the dark hallways. A silent accord had formed between them. The burden was still there, but now it was shared. The walk home through the quiet town streets was tense. Every shadow seemed to hide something. Every gust of wind whistling through the eaves sounded like a warning whisper, but they no longer walked apart. They walked close together, the presence of the other a small comfort against the vast night. When they reached the corner where their paths diverged, Emily stopped. Are you scared? She asked softly. Alex looked at his house, the porch light casting a lonely pool of light. Terrified, he admitted. But the fear of facing it is less than the fear of living with it forever. Emily nodded. She felt the same way. They stood there for another moment, unwilling to break this fragile moment of connection. The plan was set. Their fate would be decided tomorrow night. With a final nod, they turned and walked towards their homes, each carrying a strange mixture of fear and a desperate hope. The storm was coming, and they would face it together. The next night was even darker and colder. The wind howled through the bare branches of Millfield, carrying the promise of a harsh winter for Emily and Alex. It felt like a warning. They moved through the darkness with an almost silent efficiency, a coordination born of shared fear and a single purpose. First was the woodshop, where the air was thick with the smell of sawdust and machine oil. They found 2 metal putty knives, their wooden handles cold to the touch. Then they went to the auditorium, a vast and empty space where their footsteps echoed eerily behind the stage. In a pile of old and forgotten sets, they found sturdy wooden planks, a hammer, and a heavy box of nails. With their tools in hand, they headed to the familiar hallway. Every step was a heavy beat of their hearts. There were no more words to say. The plan was laid out. Now it was just a matter of execution, as Alex took the key from the loose brick and began to open each lock. A subtle shift occurred in the air's sense of pressure, as if the air were thickening, pressing on their eardrums. The room seemed to know they were coming. It was resisting. The door opened, and a blast of painfully cold air rushed out, extinguishing what little warmth they carried inside. The spiral on the wall seemed to vibrate in the darkness. A shadow within a shadow. "Let's begin," Emily said, her voice steadier than she felt. They set the planks, hammer, and nails down near the door and approached the cursed wall. They turned on their flashlights, casting trembling beams on the symbols. Alex started. He placed the metal blade of the putty knife against the plaster and pushed hard. The sound was jarring, a harsh, dry scraping that echoed in the small space. A piece of plaster broke off and fell to the floor, leaving a pale scar on the wall. Emily followed suit, and soon a grim rhythm was established. Scrape, scrape, scrape. White plaster dust filled the air, clinging to their hair and clothes. It was like ghostly snow in a shattered snow globe. At first, it seemed to be working. Bit by bit, they were erasing the curse, but as they neared the central spiral, the room began to fight back. A low humming began, barely audible at first, like the buzz of a trapped insect. Slowly, it grew louder, becoming a vibrating sound they could feel through the soles of their shoes and up their spines. Other symbols on the wall began to emit a pale, sickly green light, pulsing in time with the hum. The reversal returned, but this time more intense and brutal. I need the hammer," Alex said, but when he turned, he seemed to forget what he was looking for. He blinked at the pile of tools, a look of confusion on his face. "What?" Emily didn't answer. She was working with a cold, almost inhuman focus. Her movements were precise and efficient. No wasted motion. Her usual panic was gone, replaced by a terrifying calm. She had become Alex. "Emily?" Alex called, his voice trembling. He felt his thoughts disintegrating, like the plaster dust floating in the air. She turned to look at him. Her eyes, once warm and expressive, were now cold and empty. "We have to finish this," she said, her voice flat and emotionless. They continued to work, but the disparity grew. Alex became increasingly clumsy and forgetful, dropping his putty knife several times. Meanwhile, Emily worked with twice the strength and precision, scraping away large chunks of plaster with powerful, controlled strokes. She was carrying the weight for both of them. Finally, only the heart of the spiral remained. The humming had now become an acidic shriek, piercing their skulls. The light from the symbols flickered violently, casting dancing shadows all over the room. "Just a little more," Alex shouted over the noise, trying to concentrate. Emily said nothing. She raised her putty knife for one final blow. As the metal hit the wall, the shriek reached a deafening crescendo. A blast of white light erupted from the spiral, blinding and searing, engulfing everything in its glow. They both screamed and staggered back, shielding their eyes, and then, as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. The light vanished. The noise ceased. The room fell into an almost absolute silence and darkness, broken only by the faint beams from the dropped flashlights on the floor. The dust slowly settled. Alex blinked, trying to clear the spots from his vision. Did we do it?" He gasped. The wall before them was devastated. A large patch of plaster scraped away, revealing the rough, dark bricks underneath. The spiral was gone. Physically, it had been destroyed, but they had not won. Emily was standing motionless in the middle of the room. She slowly lowered her hands from her face. Alex shone his flashlight on her, and his heart seemed to stop. It was Emily's face, but it wasn't here. A cold, distant smile, a smile he had never seen before, played on her lips. Her eyes were empty, But beneath the emptiness was a storm of emotions he recognized all too well. It was his pain, his fear, his suppressed anger. It was all there, staring back at him from his best friend's face. The reversal wasn't destroyed. It was completed. Emily? He whispered, a cold horror washing over him. She tilted her head, her smile unwavering. No more forgetting, she said. And the voice that came out was not Emily's, nor was it Alex. It was something in between, a distorted, cold blend. Now, I remember everything. The plan had failed catastrophically. They had scraped the symbol from the wall, but in doing so, they had broken the final seal, unleashing its full power into themselves. The room was silent, but the nightmare had only just begun. Alex's world narrowed to Emily's face, and the ghastly smile upon it. The plaster dust still hung in the air, but it seemed to have stopped moving, frozen in this endless moment of horror. Emily? He repeated, but the name sounded empty and foreign in his mouth. You look confused, the girl with Emily's face said, her voice a cold, sarcastic blend. What's wrong, Alex? Forgot something? The words were a punch to the gut. They were words he might have said, the bitter sarcasm he often used to hide his own fear. To hear them from her mouth, with his own pain staring back at him from her eyes, was unbearable. This isn't you, he stammered, taking a step back, his foot catching on a wooden plank. Emily, fight it. The Emily thing laughed, a dry, mirthless sound. Fight what? The truth? I can finally think clearly. No more gaps in my memory. No more constant panic that I've forgotten something important. That burden. It's yours now, isn't it? She stepped towards him, and Alex backed away until his back hit the rough, dusty wall. She made no move to attack, but her presence was terrifying. She was the embodiment of all his inner demons. I know everything you know, she continued, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. I remember the kids on the playground. I remember what they called you. I remember the feeling of being pushed into the mud. And I remember what you did afterwards. Alex squeezed his eyes shut. Stop. You hid in the library until it got dark, she went on relentlessly, because you were too scared to walk home. You read about the stars, because they were far away and couldn't hurt you. Isn't that right, Alex? How could she know that? It was a memory he had never told anyone, a secret shame he had buried for years. Emily, please, he begged, his voice breaking. This isn't who you are. Oh, but this is who I am, she said, and her smile faded, replaced by an expression of deep pain. This is who I became that day at the quarry. Alex froze. The quarry? We've never been to the quarry together. A flicker of a frown crossed her face, her certainty wavering for a split second. Of course we were. Don't tell me you've forgotten that too. The day I tried to save you. Save me? Alex shook his head, his confusion mounting. Emily, what are you talking about? I don't remember any of that, because you weren't there to remember. She screamed, and for the first time, a crack appeared in her cold facade. Real anguish. Emily's anguish poured out. I was there. I saw the rocks give way. I saw you slip. I screamed when you fell. Her words hung in the cold air. Alex stared at her, trying to make sense of it. A false memory. The experiment had scrambled everything. No, Alex said gently, trying to hold on to reality. No, Emily, that's a false memory. I never fell at the quarry. I was never in danger. You're lying. She shrieked. No. Alex yelled back, desperation making his voice ring out. I remember that day. I heard about an accident, But I wasn't there. I was at home. I was sick, Emily. It wasn't me who fell. He looked directly into her eyes, trying to cut through the fog with the truth. It was you. You were the one who fell. Everyone in town knew about it. You broke your arm and he stopped. A terrifying silence filled the room. The Emily thing's face was completely blank. No more anger, no more pain, just an endless void. No, she whispered. That's not right. But as Alex looked at her, a horrifying truth began to dawn in his own mind. His memories. Were they real? He tried to recall that day, the day of the accident, but it was hazy. He remembered being sick, but he couldn't remember what he was sick with. He remembered hearing about it, but he couldn't remember who told him. The gaps. Always the gaps. If I was the one who fell, the Emily thing said, her voice chillingly logical. Then why do I have your memories? If I was the one who was traumatized, why were you the one who came back to this room to share the burden? The logic spun in Alex's head, an unsolvable paradox. It didn't make sense. Nothing made sense. The room seemed to darken, and the faint humming he thought had disappeared, returned. The scarred wall looked like an open wound in the darkness. And then, an image flashed in Alex's mind. Clear, sharp, and utterly impossible. He was standing on the edge of the quarry. The summer sun was bright. He could smell the dust from the rocks and the wildflowers. Below, the clear blue water sparkled. He wasn't alone. A girl with blonde hair, Emily, was laughing, and a skinny boy with dark hair, Alex, was trying to balance on an unstable ledge. They were joking around. Emily shouted a playful warning. Alex laughed and waved, and then the ground beneath the boy's feet gave way. The boy's scream. The girl's scream. The sound of an impact, the silence, the image vanished, leaving Alex gasping for breath in the dusty room. It wasn't his memory. He wasn't there. So why did he see it? Why did it feel more real than anything else? The Emily thing was looking at him, and in her eyes, he saw a truth he couldn't comprehend. You're not real, she whispered, and the words hit him with the force of a physical blow. At least, not here. Not tonight. She stepped forward and did the impossible. She reached out her hand, not to touch him, but to pass through him. Her hand went through his arm, as if it were made of smoke. There was no sensation. Just an empty coldness. You died that day, Alex. Emily's voice was broken, full of grief. There was no reversal anymore. Just the raw truth. You fell. You didn't make it. Alex looked down at his own arm, where her hand had just passed through it. Still looked solid. He could feel his heart pounding in his chest. I was the one who saw it, she said, tears beginning to stream down her cheeks. I was the one who was traumatized, and I couldn't let go. So I came back here, to the place where memories can become tangible. I brought you back, over and over again, trying to fix what happened, trying to share the burden. The nightmare had changed. It was no longer about losing his identity. It was about realizing he was never really here. Alex began, but no words could describe this horror. He was a ghost. A memory created by a friend's grief. That's why he was forgetful. He was an imperfect copy, an echo, and the room, this gateway to inverted memories, had given him a temporary form. Their plan had failed not because they weren't strong enough. It had failed because it was based on a lie he couldn't be reversed with Emily, because he was a part of her. Asterisk time seemed to shatter. Emily's words, "You died that day, Alex," didn't just hang in the air. They were the air. The walls, the dusty floor beneath his feet, they were the only reality. Alex looked down at his hands. They were still there, pale in the faint flashlight beam. The familiar lines of his palms and knuckles. He tried to make a fist. A simple, instinctive act to affirm his existence, but there was no sensation. No tightening of muscles, no pressure of flesh against flesh. It was like trying to grasp smoke. "No," he whispered. But the sound didn't come from his mouth, it simply manifested in the space. A faint echo of a thought. He raised a hand to his face. A desperate attempt to feel the solidity of bone, the warmth of skin, but his fingers passed through. They sank into a cold void where his cheek should have been, and for a horrifying moment, he saw the world through his own body, the scarred brick wall. Hazy and distorted, he was a ghost. The realization didn't come as a shock, but as a quiet surrender to an undeniable truth. All the scattered pieces of his life suddenly clicked into place. The gaps in his memory weren't forgetfulness with the spaces where a real life should have been his. Aloofness wasn't a personality trait. It was the insubstantiality of an echo. His apartment, his parents, he tried to picture them, but the images were faint and unreal. Like background actors in a forgotten dream, Emily was still crying, but her tears were no longer for the reversal or the fear. They were tears of pure, unadulterated loss, a grief that had been suppressed for too long. "I'm sorry," she sobbed, her words the only solid things in Alex's dissolving world. "I didn't want to forget you, but it hurt so much. Every day, I saw it again, you laughing, and then you slipping. I tried to grab you, but my hand just brushed against your shirt." As she spoke, the edges of the room began to blur. The flashlight beams no longer illuminated. They spread like watercolor on wet paper. The far wall seemed to recede, stretching into infinity. "I came here," Emily continued, her voice cutting through the fog that was enveloping him. "After the funeral, I heard kids talking about this place, a forgotten room. I just wanted a place to be alone. I sat here in the dark and I remembered you. I remembered you so hard, I think I willed you out of thin air." He looked at her, and for the first time, he saw her clearly, not through the lens of his own borrowed existence, but as a separate entity, a girl broken by tragedy, trapped by his memory. He wasn't a companion in her night. Marie was the nightmare. He was her wound that would never heal. "Emily," he tried to say, but no sound came out. The name was just an intention, a ripple in the stillness. His form was becoming transparent. He could see the wooden planks and the hammer on the floor through his legs. The feeling of weight, of physical existence, was leaving him. He felt light, like a speck of dust about to be carried away by a breeze. "It started slowly," she whispered, more to herself than to him. "At first, I just felt you here. Then, I started talking to you. And one night, when I looked in that mirror, I saw you standing beside me. Faint at first, but I kept coming back. Each time, you became more solid. The mirror, the gateway to memory. It didn't invert them, it amplified them, gave them form. I created you," she said, finally looking up to where he stood. Her eyes were full of tears, but there was also a painful acceptance in them. "With all my memories of you, your quietness, your intelligence, and my pain too. That's why you always felt sad." He wanted to tell her it was okay. He wanted to thank her for remembering him, for giving him a second, albeit illusory, existence. But he was no longer a communicating entity. He was a fading memory. The dissolution was accelerating. His body shimmered and rippled like a reflection on water. Emily's sobs sounded as if they were coming from a great distance. The brick wall finally vanished, and for a brief moment, he was no longer in a schoolroom. He was at the quarry. The sun was warm. He could hear Emily's laughter. He felt the looseness of the pebbles under his feet. And he wasn't afraid. There was a sense of peace, of completion. This was where his story ended. This was where it had always ended. The vision lasted only a second, And then it too dissolved. The last thing he saw was Emily's face, blurred by tears, but no longer distorted by the reversal. It was the face of his best friend, saying goodbye, and then he was gone. There was no pop or flash of light, just an absence. The presence of Alex Hayes, the echo born of love and grief, had completely dissipated into the thin air of the forgotten room. Emily was left alone. Her sobs slowly subsided into a heavy silence. The room no longer felt cursed or frightening. It was just empty, a small, dusty, cold space with a scarred wall and the abandoned tools of a meaningless plan. The silence Alex left behind was heavier than any sound the room had ever made. It was a total void. A space where an existence used to be. Emily stood motionless for minutes, maybe an hour. Time had lost its meaning. Her breath formed white clouds in the cold air, the only signs that she was still alive in this tomb of a memory. The tears had dried on her cheeks, leaving cold, salty tracks. The grief was still there, a smoldering coal in her chest, but the shock had numbed it. She no longer felt panic or terror, just a vast emptiness and a weariness that seeped into her bones. Her ghost was gone. Her wound was laid bare. She looked around the room. The scarred wall was like a physical scar on her soul. The tools, the scrapers, the hammer, the wooden planks lay scattered on the floor, relics of a battle she had lost from the start. And then she looked at the large, dusty mirror. This time, there was no shadow standing beside her, just the reflection of a tired girl with swollen eyes. Surrounded by darkness, it was in that mirror that she had brought Alex back. It was in this place that she had nurtured her grief into a phantom, and she knew, with a cold clarity, that as long as this door was open, as long as this memory was accessible, she would never be free. She would return, again and again, trying to repaint the pasta. Decision formed in her mind. Not a panicked plan like before, but a conscious choice. Cold and grim. If she couldn't erase the memory, she would seal it. She would build a wall around it, not of plaster, but of deliberate forgetting. She would lock this door and throw away the key. Her movements were slow and methodical. She picked up each tool and stacked them neatly in a corner. She didn't need them anymore. The battle was over then. She stepped out of the room, pulling the heavy wooden door shut behind her. The sound of it slamming shut echoed in the empty hallway. A definitive full stop. She faced the 4 padlocks. They were no longer objects of fear. They were her tools. Her hand was steady as she picked up the first lock. Click. The metallic sound rang out. She had just locked away the memory of Alex's smile right before he fell. She picked up the second lock. Click. She locked away the guilt of not being able to hold on to him. The third lock. Click. She locked away the months of grief that followed, the days when the silence from her neighbor's house was a constant scream. And finally, the fourth lock. Click. She locked away Alex himself, his ghost, his presence, the sweet pain of having him back. Even as an echo, she locked away the entire nightmare. She stood there for a long time in the darkness, staring at the sealed door. Relief did not come. Instead, there was a strange stillness, a twisted peace. It was as if a room in her mind, where a violent storm had raged, was now soundproofed. She still knew the storm was there, but she could no longer hear its roar. She took the single key from the last lock. Her fingers closed around it, the cold metal digging into her palm. She walked down the hallway, past the silent rows of lockers, out the back door, and into the cold night air. The sky was beginning to lighten in the east, a pale indigo streak against the black. She walked, not home, but towards the bridge that crossed the small river on the edge of town. When she reached the middle of the bridge, she stopped. Below, the dark water flowed swiftly. She looked at the key in her palm one last time. It was just a small piece of metal, but it held the weight of everything she had been through with a decisive movement. She threw it over the railing. It disappeared without a sound into the darkness. There was no splash, it was simply gone as she turned her back on the river and walked home in the rising dawn. A strange feeling washed over her. The burden had been lifted. The ache in her chest had subsided to a dull throb. She felt empty, but it was a peaceful emptiness. She had forgotten what she had just done, not completely. She knew she had been at the school. She knew something bad had happened, but the sharp details, the spiral, Alex's dissolution, her own confession were beginning to fade. Like a dream, upon waking, the wall she had built was holding. She had sealed the memory. She had chosen emptiness over pain. It was a release. A false release. The morning sun filtered through the curtains, painting dusty streaks of light in the air. Emily blinked awake, feeling a strange exhaustion, as if she had run a marathon in her sleep. Her head ached dully, and there was an odd emptiness in her chest, a nameless sadness she couldn't trace. She sat up in bed, looking around her familiar room, the band posters on the wall, the stack of books on her desk, the clothes draped over a chair. Everything was normal, too normal. Fragments of a strange, dark dream lingered at the edge of her mind. Cold hallways, a locked door, a profound sense of loss, but they dissolved like smoke whenever she tried to grasp them. Must have been a nightmare, she mumbled to herself. Rubbing her temples, she got up and started getting ready for school. Shower, getting dressed, eating breakfast alone in the quiet kitchen. Her parents had already left for work. The silence of the house was usually comforting, but this morning it felt heavier. As she was packing her books into her backpack, a sudden cold panic seized her. The history report. Where was it? She was sure she had finished it on Thursday night. She vividly remembered the relief of typing the last lines and stapling the pages together. But now, it wasn't on her desk, not in her bag, not anywhere in her room. No, she whispered, her hands starting to tremble. It was due today. Mr. Harrison would never give her an extension. She could already see his disappointed look. The big F on her paper. She tried to take a deep breath, to search her memory. What had she done with it? Had she brought it to school on Friday? Maybe she had left it in her locker. Yes, that had to be it. She had been in such a rush after school that she forgot to bring it home for a final review. A crazy, desperate idea popped into her head, a frighteningly familiar idea. Though she couldn't understand why she could sneak into the school tonight to get it, was a bad idea. Dangerous. But it was better than facing failure. She'd get detention if she were caught, but at least she wouldn't get an F. But she couldn't go alone. She was too scared. She needed someone to go with her, someone smart, calm, and trustworthy. Her gaze unconsciously drifted out the window, towards the house next door. Alex's house's bedroom window was dark. For a moment, the emptiness in her chest ached again. A pang of sadness so intense it almost took her breath away, but then it passed, leaving a clean void. Alex. He was perfect. He knew how to keep quiet and wouldn't panic. The decision was made. She would text him after school. She would convince him to go with her. They would sneak into the school, get the report, and no one would ever know. A perfect plan. She slung her backpack over her shoulder, the panic replaced by a cold resolve as she stepped out the front door, breathing in the fresh morning air. She felt almost relieved. She had no idea that she was taking the first steps down a well-trodden path. She didn't know that the rumors of a locked room with 4 padlocks, of strange noises and ghosts in the hallways, were spread by none other than herself. In countless previous loops, she didn't remember the key lying at the bottom of the river, nor the face dissolving in the darkness. She only knew that she had forgotten something important, and she had to get it back. The dawn of a new day looked perfectly normal, but to the universe, It was just the beginning of the same old nightmare. The eternal loop had begun again.